In a world where greed, inequality, and political injustice has affected many innocent people and minority groups, Bob Gnezda was there to restore the hope and change the lives of those affected and less fortunate. He convinced Ronald Reagan to give away millions of dollars worth of food to the poor that would have been otherwise wasted and dumped in the ocean. He convinced the White House and Congress to allocate a larger number of food stamps to a wider range of groups in need. He convinced the state of California to cut CEO salaries and instead use those funds towards creating more jobs for women and minorities, as well as improving minority housing and providing more people with homes. He was also a veteran of the civil rights movement and helped African American minorities gain control of their vote. In general, he has gone bravely where not many have gone before, selflessly standing up to many powerful people and governmental institutions for the sake of humane justice, letting leaders know that the poor and middle class can no longer be ignored and excluded, and that change must be implemented to better the lives of millions of people. His legacy has changed human history for the highest good possible and will never be forgotten.
Well, my view was that if I was going to make change, I could not do it in a conventional way. And everyone was hostile. Everyone tried to provoke me in different ways. Everyone told me in one way or another to get out of town. They couldn't stand an independent legal service program that was going to represent the poor against the powerful.
If I describe you, you're like the practical Robin Hood, because I know you've done the police officers here in San Francisco, women to become a police officers. You also won the case of the food stamps.
Yes.
I mean, what else have you done, Bob?
Well, I've brought a lot of cases against corporations, and I've taken on government when government has refused to recognize its democratic principles.
How many cases have you won?
Hundreds. I almost always had a CEO on the stand that I was cross-examining.
And you gave up all the income that you could have made. You never took anything for your own good.
Well,
like, I love money.
Yeah, I love it too, but I've always had enough. And having 10 million a year as opposed to 150,000 is not that valuable.
That's amazing. It's amazing. Bob, just say advice like in 3 words or 5 words to the people that adores you.
Well, I don't know how many people adore me, but my advice...
I do!
Thank you. I would say my advice is to be true to yourself and follow your convictions, and don't be that afraid, because the consequences most of the time will be beneficial.
Thank you so much, Bob, for all the work that you've done for all of us.
Well, thank you very much, Faith, for letting me work with you and your great team.
Thank you.
It's always a great pleasure for me to honor a kid like Bob here, years younger than I am, so it's a particular pleasure. I'm sure I have great hopes for him when he grows up. I made a couple of notes. CRLA, I have DC complaint, it says. That's always been one of my favorite activities that Bob was involved in. He filed a complaint which he sent to the White House against several agencies because they didn't have proper affirmative action programs. And it was so well done that the lawyers in the White House thought it was a formal complaint, and they called him to see if they could get an extension of time to answer his complaint. Bob, we're all proud of the work that you've done for all these years.
You know, leadership is about inspiring people, and that's what Bob does. He inspires people through his courage, through his intellect, through his good-naturedness, and for his heart, and for what he wants to do on behalf of people in this country. And that inspires others to want to be like him and emulate him. And if I can pack into my experience, you know, what he's packed into in his 60 years in this business and doing what he's done, I'll feel very lucky. And you guys are lucky to have him, and we're all lucky to know him.
I guess the most important thing I want to say about Bob Gnezda, and I say it to many people, is he is the most imaginative and effective lawyer that I've ever worked with. Bob won the Lauren Miller Award from the California Bar Association, naming him the most effective public interest lawyer in California. As far as I know, he's been the most effective public interest lawyer in this nation. Let me give you an example of how efficient and effective Bob can be. Back in the 1980s, Bob was one of the first people to understand the significance of the census, the allocation of billions of dollars of federal welfare and other social programs were determined based on census data. So Bob, instead of filing a lawsuit or writing an article, he sent a letter to the Secretary of Commerce in the Reagan administration who controlled the census. And he pointed out in this letter that Mexican Americans and other people of color had been grossly undercounted in the federal census and were therefore being unjustifiably deprived. The consequences of that letter, which took him about 30 minutes to write, was probably in the hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars in reallocated federal funds that benefited working people.
Bob is unafraid. Bob is fearless, and Bob will fight until he cannot fight anymore for those people that are underserved, whether they are minorities or low and moderate income people. Bob is a fighter, and he doesn't give up. Bob will fight until he takes his last breath. Bob cares about people. He treats everyone with dignity and respect. Bob may disagree with you on an issue, but he is not disagreeable.
How would you describe him as a leader?
So I think he's tough, he's assertive, he's thoughtful, he's persuasive, he's moral. I think some people, that's not a word you use, but I think it's a good word to use. He's moral. He's always had a lot of moral integrity, and I think that's always given him the high ground in his leadership. And he's just been an effective advocate and friend and advisor. I always listen to him, still listen to him. He's always had access to the top leadership in Washington. That's because it's always worth listening to what he has to say. And I think of Bob that way, as a happy warrior. He never gives up, but he always maintains a positive attitude, and he's been so effective over the years. So I wish him well, and I think congratulate him on that. Don't stop, Bob. Keep it up. Whatever you're doing next in retirement, please stay involved. Now more than ever, we need a voice like yours.
I was the vice president of the Bank of California, and under very unusual circumstances that weren't related to me, I was involved in protecting one of the black high-ranking employees in the bank. And when I left the bank, I said to them, you really can't treat minorities and women the way you do. I'm going to make a change in that. And I went to all of the famous lawyers in San Francisco. I went to the government agencies that are supposed to be in charge of issues like minority employment. They all told me to go to hell, politely. I finally found Bob Gnezda. He brought the case, we won, and Bob took that victory, went to all of the major financial institutions and said, sign on to this too, which is to put minorities and women in management and high-ranking positions. Banking was and still is probably the most integrated business in America, thanks to Bob Gnezda.
as we grow older and as there are fewer and fewer of us left, it's very important that we not lose the insight, the information, the knowledge of people and of events that occurred during our time. It's up to us to tell the true history of people, extraordinary people like Bob, who lived in our time. And I'm convinced, as I have been for many years, that Bob is the greatest public advocate in the history of the world. That he, think about it, 50 years of advocacy for minorities, for women, for farm workers, for the handicapped, for low-income people, for disenfranchised people from all over. Almost anybody who was less fortunate could count on help and support from Bob. As a matter of fact, this has been the essence and purpose of Bob's entire life. The banks and the power people would bring in their lawyers from all over the country, and there'd be 100 lawyers in the room representing these utilities, and that would be Bob and I. And I would say, Bob, look at, they got all these lawyers. He said, don't worry about it. It means we're even. The thing that I want to mention, though, and I haven't had an occasion, even though I've known Bob all these many years, I've never had occasion before to say to Bob directly that I appreciate, as a beneficiary of his efforts, the risk and the sacrifices that Bob has had to make over all these many years. Because in order for Bob to be effective, he had to challenge, he had to get in the face, he had to confront some of the most powerful institutions in this country. The power industry, the banks, the insurance companies, and even governmental agencies had to be confronted in order for Bob to be effective. And in doing this, he had to often sail against the current of his time.
Bob, we want to thank you. And I know this is your final answer. You're going to retire, because you've said that many times. But I know this is it, and we know that. So I'm gonna miss you badly. Not just me, but everyone will miss you. You're a special man. You work so hard. You never give up. You're not afraid of anybody. No one is richer than you. No one is poorer than you. But you deserve to retire. And you take care because you left a legacy. You will always be remembered, and wherever you're doing or whatever you're gonna be doing, Bob Ginesta will always be around, because I will never stop thanking you and will never stop talking about you. We love you so much, Bob. I love you dearly. Thank you.